Great. So thanks everybody for joining us for our September meetup. We usually do a meetup as this group once a month, with usually a couple of months gap in the summer just to kind of give us a bit of a break. This month we're going to be looking at documentation best practices with our special guest speaker, Jodi Hrbek, who is here with us today, and we'll introduce Jodi in just a little bit. But we're going to start off actually with a little bit of a recap, because if you're in the Salesforce space, you've probably heard of a little thing that's been happening over the last week called Dreamforce. So we're going to open that up, just do a bit of a recap on that, and see if anybody wants to chat about it, basically. And we're going to keep that fairly loose and fairly light touch, and we'll keep on that. But just again to say, we are going to be recording this session, which we have already started. So if you, for any reason, don't feel you don't want to be on the recording at all in terms of screens, we're going to encourage you to keep your camera off and your microphone on mute. And if you afterwards decide to change your mind, it's just a case of letting me know. Pop me a message or an email and letting me know. So, moving on to introduce ourselves a little bit, just because there's a few people here who might not know who we are. Kristen, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, so I'm sort of the unofficial group leader. I used to live near Newcastle and now I live in Edinburgh. So there you go. But I am a senior recruitment consultant at Supermoms. I've done the Supermoms training course, so I'm a qualified admin as well. And I'm just excited to be here. I saw Jodi I've seen you in my LinkedIn feed for like years now, but I listened to a couple of podcasts that you did, and was just super inspired and really excited to hear from you tonight. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. And for those who don't know me, I'm Mark Jones. I am the co-user group leader of this group. I'm a Salesforce consultant at Cloud Galacticos, and I'm a 5-time certified Salesforce professional. We do also have a third user group leader who is not with us at the moment. He's taking a bit of a break, and that is, for those who might not know, Luke Mansfeld, who is being a really big part of this group. But at the moment, he's taking a little bit of a break to spend time with his newly born daughter, who was born back in June. So that's us as the group. And now we're going to move on to our Dreamforce recap. So I'm going to share very briefly about kind of, I guess, my experience. I was there in person, and then we'll open up the floor to see if anybody wants to chat about it. Just looking from who's on here. I don't know if everybody's names here tonight, to be honest. Some names are a bit new to me. So you might have been there, and I might not have seen you. There was around 30 to 40,000 people there. So it was hard to meet everybody. I'll preface that way. So if you were there in person, or if you watched anything online, we will have an open time just to chat about it and share our thoughts, I guess. But for me, this is my first time there, and you can see there's just some of the images that were captured while I was there, and there's a lot more in my bag, but I didn't want to share every single photograph because that would take forever, and you wouldn't even see them necessarily. So for me personally, this is actually my first time in the US. I had never been over to the United States at all until Dreamforce. So it was quite a few firsts in it. It's like my first time in the US, my first time at Dreamforce in person, and I was actually speaking at Dreamforce where I spoke at 2 sessions. I spoke on presentation skills, and I also spoke on Slack actions and Flow Orchestrator, and combined them two together. There was a ton of things that happened, as you can probably imagine. We had the Dreamfest concert, which was headlined by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I say headline, they were really the only act. The other act outside that was a DJ. Outside of that, we had a bunch of other stuff going on, including like the non-profit party. And as you can see, that I got to meet both Astro and Lionheart Astro, as well as Cody and some other mascots, which I didn't quite manage to get pictures of. It's surprisingly hard to get a picture of a twerking appy. going around. I'm not sure why, but a lot of the mascots were randomly twerking for some reason there. But there's a lot of really good sessions. I managed to get into the admin keynote, which was really, really good. Got to see Michelle Hansen, who some of you might know the name of, or know a bit more personally. Get the golden hoodie, and also get to see some really good things around, particularly the admin skills kit, which I'm a little bit biased around because I was involved in the community blog series with that, as was Emma, who's here with us tonight. And I don't want to kind of take too much time on that, but I thought I would share kind of one of my favorite bits about that, the whole Dreamforce experience, which was actually getting to meet a lot of people, many of whom I've only met online, virtually, in person. People like I mentioned there, Michelle Hansen, a bunch of other people who I've only met either via Twitter DMs, LinkedIn messages, or via Zoom calls like this. So I got to meet quite a few people over there, and during the week I spent quite a lot of time in the admin meadow, which is where the admin skills kit is, which you can see on the top left photo. And one of the highlights for me of that was actually the day I was helping out with there. Emma's heard the story already, so she'll know what's coming. But one of the things I found really enjoyable, because it was just a nice little bit of levity. I find these events quite intimidating, being around so many people. But I found this experience to be quite a bit of a levity. Oh, hang on, sorry. So I was on the admin skills kit stand, talking to people about the skills kit, and at one point a Salesforce employee comes up and who's about to take on the next shift or volunteering to man the stand. And as you might be able to see in the left-hand corner picture, if you ever squint so much, the image in the circular image on the left-hand side of the grid there is me. And I'm standing on the other side of the screen right next to my face, and the Salesforce employee comes up and asks me if I'm a new admin and if I would like to learn more about the admin skills kit. And that for me was just a really nice moment, because as you can imagine, with being big events, I'm a little bit tense on the inside, and that just kind of really let me kind of relax a little bit, in a sense, because I just found that moment just so funny, to be fair. Just having to turn around to this poor Salesforce employee and go, actually, yeah, that picture there, that's me. I know I've got a beard now, but that is me, I promise. So that was a really fun experience. Another personal highlight for me was seeing, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, we've got a picture there of a friend of mine in the ecosystem, Christine Marshall, doing the session with Megan Turano. And Megan actually reached out to me a few months back and asked for some advice on how to submit ideas for talks for sessions. And I didn't think she needed the input of me personally. I think she more is capable of doing this kind of stuff. But being able just to be, a small little source of encouragement, and to see Megan then go on to speak at something as big as Dreamforce was really, really cool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. I'm going to open up the floor and see if anybody has any things that they want to share, if they were at Dreamforce themselves, or if they watched it online, or if they had any questions they wanted to ask about the overall experience. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now so I can see everybody and open up the floor to people. Cool.
I guess I've got a question, Mark. What would you say was the most valuable thing you got out of attending Dreamforce? Because I want to know, so I can say that to my boss to try and get a ticket next time.
Yeah, that one for me, it was definitely meeting other people in and around the Salesforce ecosystem. So in full transparency, I got the probably 6 or 7 sessions, because across 3 days, there's just that much going on. So for me, it was the networking and the connections that were being made, and some of the discussions I had, which I can't actually get into on there. Some of the conversations I had there were really, really good, and will be beneficial in the months and years coming forward. And I know people over the years who have went to an event like Dreamforce and have come out and they've ended up in like new jobs in a few months' time because they've met somebody at Dreamforce or World Tour.
And by the way, that's not what you want to lead with when you're talking to your boss.
Yeah.
No, definitely not. But yeah, it's the networking. So, like, if you're in the consulting space, you can, the networking could potentially lead to leads and new clients potentially. So for me, it's definitely the networking. That was the big thing.
Awesome, thank you.
And so, did anybody watch Dreamforce Online at all? And what was that like?
Did anyone else attempt to watch Dreamforce Online and find themselves locked out of all of the sessions?
Yeah, I did look and got confused and then bored and found that my actual job was more interesting, so I went into my actual job instead.
I live stream. Go ahead, Emma.
I had no problems this year with the live stream. Compared with last year, it was loads better.
Yeah, there was definitely no Disney Plus, was there?
No, I thought it was better this year. Did you have problems, Kristen?
I didn't try for a lot of the live sessions just because like timing didn't work. But when I went to watch a lot of the replays, it was, first of all, they locked all the content until like, I don't know, the last day, I think. And then, but you could watch like sort of like live recaps. I don't know, it was really strange. So I did kind of do it one day in the background while I had other stuff going on, but I just found it really, I don't know, just difficult to keep up with. And then they were supposed to like segment the different sessions, so that you could go back and like watch the admin, specific content and stuff. But I've not gone back since. I mean, that's a different story. I went on holiday, so I was like, yeah, I'm not going to watch that while I'm in Valencia. But but during the entirety of the conference itself, all that content was locked, so you couldn't access any of it, which was what I was most looking forward to.
I also, it was asked, I think it was at True to the Core, why they had not live streamed the keynote. And what they said was they didn't live stream it. They released it like 2 hours later. And they said it was so they could edit out a lot of the dead space, because they were saying that people watching virtually don't really want to sit there watching people walking up and down, if they're collecting stuff and all that. But the thing that frustrated me about that was I would rather have had that option, because what happened instead was Genie got announced and landed in my mailbox, and Twitter blew up on over a load of other stuff before I actually watched the content. And I was like, I'd rather have the choice and then you put the recording out after. Like, can we not have a bit of a halfway here? Because that just made it a bit. But yeah, and also they only put out the key sessions, so like the keynotes and stuff. They didn't record a lot of the smaller sessions, and they're going along with it's to do with quality. Which, okay, but again, in actual fact, what I thought you were going to say, Kristen, was I think it was definitely the non-profit keynote. One of the videos, for example, they didn't have the volume at the right sound, so everybody watching it couldn't hear it. So then, luckily, they must have been somebody moderating the chat. There appeared to be a person, but you never know. And they actually did fix it for the next one, but that wasn't ideal. But okay, things happen. But yeah, it just would be nice, because I think that was live. So I just thought it was a bit like, oh yeah, well, quality-wise. And I was thinking, yeah, but it's not that hard to have stuck a camera in front of Mark while he was talking, for example. Like, we've seen that from things like Your Dreaming and from, London's Calling. We're not expecting like a beautifully polished, edited, an intro slide will do.
Yeah,
just telling us who it is.
Yeah, like who's making the decisions? Is it like marketing that's like saying, no, we can't put it out unless it's, polished and, got all the sign-offs or what? But yeah, for admins in other time zones and for people who are streaming it, you think like, God, you just want to watch it, kind of like as it's happening and or at least, like you say, have the ability to make some decisions about how you want to consume the content.
Yeah.
So I've just been catching up with the content today. So I was out from us last week. What I find really frustrating is the way they package the EMEA content. So I watched the keynote, and then I watched True to the Core because I found that really interesting last year. And then I thought, right, what can I watch next? And I sometimes find Salesforce Plus is quite confusing to navigate. But I saw the EMEA stuff and I thought, oh, okay, the fact that there's 3 EMEA sessions seems that it's not just a repackaging of the keynote, but actually they did like a 5-second intro, then they played 20 minutes of the keynote, and then they did another interview at the back of it. And it's either do separate EMEA content or don't do separate EMEA content, but don't repackage US content as EMEA, but just replay it and then put 5 minutes of extra content on it, because it's just a waste of time, because
I
most
think
people
it
are going to watch
was,
the main content.
yeah, exactly. They played that live on the Wednesday, I think it was, at 12 o'clock our time. Now, I can kind of understand that if you wanted to say, you have to be very clear, this is an EMEA stream of other content that we've put together at a suitable time. But then why put it on Salesforce Plus? Because like you say, you're then going to go away and watch that actual keynote and that's the bit that doesn't make sense. I'm like, great trying. I guess what they're trying to do is be like, oh, look, here's something in the EMEA time zone when you're actually up, in case you don't want to watch stuff in the evening. But then with Salesforce Plus, why not just make sure it's on there and released for people? It's
They've done
odd.
something similar with release readiness in the past, where they've replayed the US release readiness recording from 2 weeks prior, and then just had EMEA PMs hosting it. And you're like, well, I already watched that release readiness. If you're not got any new content for us, okay, why are you wasting my time?
And I've also found now that I end up watching the EMEA session, the Americas session, because everything comes out, all the blogs and all of that will come out based on that. So if you wait till you get to the EMEA session, you're like, I think I already know this. I think I once did it almost by mistake. You know, it was like, oh, I'll watch this. And then I was like, oh, no, I know all this. Why? Oh, Salesforce Ben, Trailhead Badgers, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, why am I here? It's like, there's no point now. But yeah, I think I can never understand why they don't run. If they're going to do that EMEA session, why isn't it just on the Monday? They always do admin on the Friday night. Why don't they just do it Monday? Like, after the weekend, go. And at least then we'd kind of be keeping up to a degree. But who knows? I never understand why it's like 2 weeks later. Like,
after it's already been
what
released.
happens in those 2 weeks? It's like, can you not bring the timeline down? I don't know.
Sorry, Mark, we've gone off topic.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. We're trying to right the wrongs of Salesforce release stuff, and I don't think we're ever going to. So I think we'll stop trying.
To be fair, well, you're talking about that. I think quite a few people know some of my views on Salesforce Plus. So I'll talk about extensive, which I think it's good that we have it, but there's a lot wrong with it.
Room for improvement.
Hey, Mark,
Lots of room for improvement.
I was just going to give just a piece of advice. I think it was Tom that asked about making the business case to go. So as somebody who puts budget aside for that, there's a couple of things that I would just throw out for other folks that are trying to think about that. One is, like, I don't know about everybody else's organizations, but we're putting our training budgets together now for next year. So as much as you might not be thinking about, your case for next year's Dreamforce, depending on when your organization budgets, it's never too early, number one. And then the other piece I would also throw out, though, is if somebody's going to come and tell me they need to do all this networking and do all this learning at Dreamforce, I also want to see some evidence that you're already networking and taking advantage of other resources that are available, be they local Dreaming events or virtual events like this. If it's somebody who's, and by the way, you're all on this call, so I'm pretty sure we don't have that issue or you wouldn't be here, but just something to tell your friends that the very first case that you make shouldn't be that you're going to use words like networking for the very first time, because if I'm your boss, I'm going to say, great, tell me what you've been doing to date. And the answer better not be nothing. I'm waiting for Dreamforce, right? So just a couple, tips as somebody who does that budgeting.
Yeah, I would.
Or get on a speaking slot.
Well, or that, right? Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get involved with the different clouds and offerings, and see what what your company wants to present, and see if you're willing to get involved in it.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think, without sounding as if I'm being negative about Dreamforce, I'm not being negative. And it's also the case of a lot of the community conferences, a lot of the content that come out there. If you've been around the Salesforce ecosystem for a while, a lot of the content that comes out is pitched too low for quite a few of us. So one of the biggest things I can see in terms of actually getting something out of these events is actually to participate as either a speaker, whether it's volunteering at an admin stand or whatever. Giving back is one of the biggest ways you can give out there. And also, if you think about it from a marketing perspective, if someone sees you and you're speaking, the first thing they're going to do is go look you up on Twitter, look you up on LinkedIn, and again, depending on what kind of company you are, they might go, oh well, they're interesting. I'm going to have a look at their company and see kind of how they can help us. So it acts as an easy marketing avenue as well. If you're getting as a speaker or volunteer somewhere, because the first thing people do is go, okay, Phil Murray was speaking. What does Phil do? Oh yes, I can see what company he works at now. I can have a look and see what they can do for us. Or yeah, so that kind of stuff as well is a big part of it.
The one other thing I would add as well, just I didn't go this year. I've gone for the last 3 years, but several years I've gone only to walk the floor. I don't know if they still do it expo only pass, but they used to give away that. And that was worth my time, just in the sense of I knew that we were looking at different tools, different apps, whatever they were, that you could go and see a whole lot of demos in short order instead of having to engage for an hour with every single SDR before you could even take a peek at something. So just, again, food for thought. If you are going, if you're in the middle of evaluations or know they're coming up, that's another way to shave off a lot of time, to be able to just walk that floor and get those kind of anonymous demos when you can ask questions and not necessarily need to give an entire use case of why you're asking.
And I have seen a comment in the chat, and I will look to find the link for it. But there was a comment in the chat about how, from Melissa, seeing disappointed that the sessions weren't recorded, or at least not all of the sessions were recorded. And I do know that some of the admin track sessions are being repackaged as recordings post Dreamforce. I don't know how many. I don't know. I haven't been asked to do mine as of yet. So I don't know what the exact numbers are going to be or how that's going to necessarily look like. But what I do know is that there has been conversation that they are going to be redone, because the admin team were like, we've got so many good sessions out here, but we can't stream them. So how do we get the content into the hands of the admins and the community? The first one of those have actually come out today. So I will look for the link and I will share. And I see Emma's reaction. Emma, you've heard a variation of the session plenty of times before, because it was Louise Lockie's session on permission set.
I saw that. It didn't actually click that was why. I just would like to say, after we've had a good moan about them, big up Salesforce for actually going, this is good stuff, because that's what we need, right? It's good stuff, so let's share it. And if it has to get shared in a slightly different way, and that was my other thought, and I nearly said that and then thought, no, that's silly. But, I'm assuming it's not on Salesforce Plus, because we can probably find that they can share it in other ways, and maybe it doesn't have to have quite that polished, marketing approved guys.
Yeah.
Do you know what? As long as it comes out somewhere, people will find it. So awesome.
Definitely.
I'll go find that video from Louise Lockie. I'll go find it in a minute. I'll post it in the chat.
So I'll find the podcast as well. But yeah, just from an experience perspective, after being a world tour and a Dreamforce, as much as I would love to see all the sessions being recorded, I can fully understand why they don't happen. If you, for example, a bunch of sessions happen in what was called the Community Cove, there's no way you'll be able to do a good quality recording in the Cove. There's just too much noise around those areas to actually get a good quality recording of those sessions. Similar even in the admin theater, there's just too much going around, too much noise, so you just hear all the background stuff. I even went to, it wasn't Dreamforce as well too. I went to an admin theatre session and could not hear anything the speaker was saying because the group on the other side was far too loud. So so I understand why we don't get that, but it's good that we are getting at least some of that, and it'll be interesting to see how many more sessions come out from that. Cool. I think we're gonna move on, and I'm gonna just share my screen very briefly again. And thanks, Emma, as well for sharing that. So we've done a brief little recap of Dreamforce, and we're going to move on now into our main slice for tonight's meeting, which is with our special guest speaker, Jodi Hrbek, who is the author of Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin, which is a great book if you haven't read it yet. And just to give a spoiler, we do have 3 copies of that to give away this evening as well. So we're just going to introduce Jodi, and I'll pass on to Jodi in just a second. So as mentioned, Jodi's the author of Rock Your Role as a Salesforce Admin. Jodi's also the Center of Excellence Lead at Invitation Homes and is a 12-time certified Salesforce professional. And it's really great to have you here, Jodi. Kristen mentioned how she's been following you for quite a while. I'll be completely honest and say I came across you from David Giller's Brainiac podcast earlier in the year and really liked what you had to say in that. So we do have that link that we're going to share in the chat as well for anybody else who wants to watch that session. So that was a really good session to watch along with. But with that, I'm going to pass on to you, Jodi, and I'll let you take it from here.
Let me share my screen here. Didn't know you were going to give me such a nice intro with my picture, because now you're going to think I'm oversharing my picture, but I'm going to pop this up anyway as our starting place. I'm assuming you're seeing my nice to meet you slide.
Yes, I can see that.
Awesome. So we already talked about, I'm from San Antonio. I've got a new book out. I'm very excited. Just a little bit about my background. I have been doing Salesforce in some way, shape, or form for over 20 years. I kid you not. My fun fact is I was at the very first Dreamforce. So as much as you're talking about the size and scale right now, I have lots of stories about the very first one that I went to that was at a very small hotel and, you know, kind of felt like any other small town, you know, tech show we've all been to. So I often say, you know, don't forget that even Salesforce and Dreamforce came from very humble beginnings and weren't overnight successes, even though, you know, folks coming in now to the ecosystem might not have that perspective. I also, most of you probably heard me tell the story before if you've heard the podcast, but one of the stories that I like to tell about that first Dreamforce, just to show how far things have come, is my personal objective at that show was to meet with the product manager to explain why we so desperately needed an OR filter in our reports. Because back then, if you wanted to report on this or that, you literally had to run 2 reports. So as they say, we've come a long way. I've had jobs in kind of, I say all sides of the table, if you will. I spent 4 years working directly for Salesforce. I spent 3 years as an independent consultant, but for the last 8 years, and really kind of where I started is where I ended, I've been working on the client side. So I'm partial to that, I'm biased to that, and have spent, I guess, again, the last 8 years in 2 different jobs managing large Salesforce implementations. Another just fun fact that I like to share, just because it's, you know, some people don't know about this, but where I am right now at Invitation Homes, it's my second tour of duty. I stood up the original org and then left and came back 5 years later. But we have 1,400 users all running on platform as a service. So a lot of people think Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, but underneath all those clouds, right, is this relational database that is actually sold. They keep changing the license name, but it's essentially a Salesforce platform license where you get to leverage kind of the core capabilities of the platform, a couple standard objects, certainly the user object, activities, accounts, contacts, that's about it. And so for companies like ours, we own and manage a whole lot of rental properties. We didn't need Sales Cloud or Service Cloud, at least for the particular use case we were supporting on the org. So we leveraged the platform to manage via custom objects all of our very custom processes throughout our operations. So how we decide what homes we're going to buy, how we get them ready to lease through a rehab and renovation process, and then how we actually lease them. So kind of fun fact, a lot of people don't know that that is an option. And it's also an option, by the way, to augment Sales Cloud or Service Cloud. So just a way that you can add value if you've got people that might benefit from having ancillary processes automated who don't need to see kind of the core stuff. Not always something your AE will tell you. So Mark, you might want to, black out my face on the recording if this is going out to, our Salesforce AE friends, but it really is a good way to help clients or your organization kind of maximize their investment in the platform. So the other thing I wanted to say is I skipped over here my title slide. When Mark asked if I wanted to talk about documentation best practices, I think my first question was, does that mean I have to practice best practices? Because I will certainly be one that will, we can talk about what those are, but I'm pragmatic, like many of you, that we know that, there's kind of, the pie in the sky of, in a perfect world, the things we should do. And then the pragmatic approach of, we're busy, we're generally understaffed, and we've got to make choices every day about what we actually do. So I am certainly not going to come on and proclaim to be the expert documentation person by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today are ways you can start practicing documentation that may or may not be kind of the best way to do it, but a way realistically for some of us that are resource constrained or time constrained to at least get started. So wanted to call that out. And I also wanted to call out my last bullet, which is 20 years in Salesforce. I've done, and sometimes not done, much to my chagrin, a lot of documentation in my day. And I share that last part about sometimes not done is coming back to an org that I built and stood up years later. I always say it's a lot less fun to blame the consultants or the people that built your org for all its current issues when you're the one that did it. So, of all the things I wish I would have spent more time on that first go round, 5 years later, needing to remember, why did we do it this way? So I always take that into account on days when we're thinking about, not necessarily wanting or having the time to do it, what it feels like to be the one to inherit that. So with that, I promise I'm not going to be particularly lengthy or PowerPoint heavy today. You know that I'm standing between lots of people's dinner time or happy hour or maybe lunch hour here for those calling into the States. So we'll kind of keep this casual and feel free to jump in at any time if you have questions. But there's a question that sometimes gets asked about what's the best type of documentation. And, jokingly, we say kind of tongue in cheek, right? Any compared to none, right? Any said every new Salesforce admin, right? Who walked in and wished they had some. Every consultant who had to go look in your org and figure out what they were dealing with and making sure they weren't going to break something. Or, of course, you or us when we need to remember how and why we did that thing last year, right? Because I don't know about the rest of you, but I can tell you 20 years in, things don't always come quickly back as much as they used to. So, the joke here is, while we don't necessarily want to say that, scribble on a napkin, which is what this picture is enough, at the end of the day, sometimes we have to start where we are. And so that's what I wanted to do today, is give a couple of pragmatic approaches and then show you some things that I have done in my orgs that have helped. All right. So first I got to find out, does this feel familiar? Anybody been there? First day work, new job, new org, you're looking in there. What do you mean there's no documentation, right? And then there's the flip side of it, right? Anyone been here? You got that new person going, where's the documentation? And you've been busy actually doing the work and you're going, I am the documentation, right? Anybody relate? Raise your hand. Anybody feel familiar on this? So we all know why we need it, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm going to assume that kind of as a group of Salesforce professionals, we're all on board with why we need it. But you know, these are real things, right? And so then we start telling ourselves like, well, if I spend a lot of time, it's going to be outdated anyway. Anybody relate to this one here, right? How, you know, even if I did it, it's already not going to work. So maybe I'm not going to prioritize it. And then there's this one too, right? This is a picture from my book. But we're just busy. We've got a million other things to do. And is that really the best and highest use of my time? And even if it is, people are screaming for other things, and maybe they're not screaming for documentation. So it becomes easy, I think, for us to decide not to do it or to make other things more important. But we all know we got to do it. We all know it's not the most fun thing around, but there's got to be some ways that we can make it easy. So that's really what I wanted to focus on. I'm going to pause, see if anybody has any questions, comments, anything they want to share based on any gut reactions. Anyone goes, oh, I get it.
Yeah, totally agree with absolutely everything that you just said.
All right, I want to make sure I'm not the only one.
No,
It'd be embarrassing if everybody was like, no, we love it and ours is perfect, and I would have to just like hang it up. So
that's a phrase I've never heard.
Right, exactly.
Currently, our documentation is being generated through getting the people that know it in their heads and recording them talking about it, and then we've got it, and we can draw it later.
100%. In fact, you'll see in a minute. That's one of my recommendations. Like, start where you are, right?
Sorry, I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, it was perfect. I love that. I love that. So what I wanted to start with here was just what I call the no-brainers, right? And again, I am a big proponent of, you know, if we have the capacity, if we have the resources, you know, I just finished sitting for the Salesforce BA certification, and they, you know, talk through some, you know, beautiful different ways and tools and ways of thinking about process mapping and putting diagrams together. You're not going to see a lot of that here, and it's not because I don't think all of that's important. I think that, you know, depending on where you work, if you've got those resources, certainly if you work for a consultancy, there's probably people whose jobs are to do that. If you work for a large org, hopefully there are people that can help do that. But like I said, I'm a pragmatist at best. My teams have always been scrappy, and small but mighty is the words that I use. And we put out a lot of really great work, and we do the best that we can to come up with just the right amount of documentation. So again, I just wanted to kind of preface that, since I'm being recorded, to say, you know, I'm gonna show some kind of quick, I'm gonna call them the quick and dirties here. And it's not because I don't think all that other stuff is really ideal. It's just that, you know, I know the reality of how a lot of us are getting our work done every day. So talk about the no-brainers first, right? These to me are easy breezy. It's almost harder to not do some of this stuff than it is to do it. So, you know, in the spirit of, you know, let's make it as easy as we can to write down what we did, why we did, these are going to be what I call the no-brainers, right? So description fields, never blank, right? Certainly for custom fields, custom objects, for flows, permission sets. There's probably 10 other places inside the org that I wasn't thinking of where those live, but it's a mantra that we have inside my organization, inside my team. Description field is never blank, right? And that could be when you're creating that stuff for the first time, or as you're starting to, you know, get familiar with an org and learning what some of that stuff is and why. It's never too late to go populate that, right? In a perfect world, everybody has some kind of ticket number, story number, whether that is through Jira, or I'm going to show you in a minute kind of how we actually use the platform inside my organization to manage our work. But if, you know, whatever that is, at a bare minimum, if you actually don't have something like that, something that references the initiative, but in other words, why did we do this and where can I go find more, right? So ideally your ticket or story is something that's searchable, that's going to have more of the deets besides what you can fit in the description field. One of the things that my team, we've got kind of a working agreement on, is we always will explain how a field is populated. So, you know, in the old days, they were all manual entry, but these days there's any number of, whether it's integration, whether it's a flow. Yes, we still have lots of process builders and workflows that are populating things, code, whatever it is. and we have the agreement as well. It's not enough to just say process builder. Which one? Give me a link. How do I know when I'm looking at this, how to trace this back? So, you know, and again, as I'm talking through this and said, you know, the term working agreement, it's something that I would encourage people as well to, you know, as an organization, as an admin team, as a consulting group, whatever it is, to agree on what's your minimum standard that you want to put in there. Comments as well. Salesforce gives us the ability to add, I'm going to use the word plain English, quote unquote, so that we can say whether we're doing a formula, validation, rule, code, for those of you that play on the dev side of the house. I think this is something that is, generally speaking, not utilized as enough as it should be. You know, I'm not as great at formulas as I used to be back in the day. So there's nothing that I appreciate more if I go flip one open where I can see, you know, in the comments exactly kind of what this is supposed to do in logical, plain grammatical text. So I don't have to sit and try to figure out exactly what that formula is saying. So big time saver. And by the way, it's also a way for you as you're building out your formula to be able to make sure that you're kind of, you know, matching what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So it's kind of a win-win. This one down here is less about when you're doing things and more about as you're finding things. So again, I don't know what everybody else's experience is, but in my experience, if you're working with an org that is more than a couple years old, there is likely lots of, I use the word defunct, but stuff that's no longer needed inside that org, whether that's an object, whether that's fields, whether that's some of these workflow rules, whatever it is, there are things that you don't need. You know you don't need them. Maybe they're not on a page. You look at where is this used? The answer is nowhere, or it's used in a bunch of reports that you know are, you know, retired and just haven't been killed yet. So we also know that we don't just, you know, go out aimlessly and start getting rid of all that defunct stuff, right? There's a lot of analysis that needs to happen to make sure we're not going to break something, to make sure we're communicating, whatever that is. But the one thing that you can do that makes life a lot easier for fellow admins, dev team, whoever it is to go in and change your label. The naming convention that my teams use is Z underscore. So if we see objects with Z underscore, if we see fields with Z underscore, we know that those are on the chopping block. Don't know when, right? But we know that they have been indicated as something that seemingly, you know, they'd be gone if all the work was done, but that seemingly are defunct and no longer needed. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm curious if anybody else does that in particular.
We do have a couple of places where we've identified things that aren't in use still, but they've been around for a while. But the thing that I do want to say is I'm very, very cautious around comments. My experience has been that particularly junior devs read the comments and don't read the code, and the comments don't compile. They can be rubbish if somebody's changed it afterwards and not changed the comment. So yes, comments where appropriate, but you have to be really, really cautious.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And by the way, that's true with all documentation in general, right?
Yeah.
Because I think part of the challenge of why we kind of resist it, which is it's only as good as how updated it is. So that whether it's in your comments or whether you're relying on, you know, a process map, is if we almost need to agree if we're going to do it, here's the method by which we're going to keep this up to date. Otherwise, it's more dangerous than helpful. So I think that's a great point. Thank you.
I think that label thing is a genius idea. My opportunity objects, I think I use 50% of the fields that I have on the object. And it's on my to-do list alongside write documentation for the organization to go through and tidy up those opportunity fields. But realistically, there's 100 other things that I have to do before I do that. So they always sit there. And then every time I do an export or I'm talking to, you know, an external data person and they ask for my data set, and then they come back to me and say, so what does this field do? And I have to say, yeah, we haven't used that field in 2 years. So just being able to update the label to say, ignore this is just genius. Yeah. Definitely do that.
there's another benefit as well. I'm glad you said that. One is they all fall. The reason that we do Z underscore is they all fall to the bottom of like your list if you're looking at custom fields. So they're just not even things that are noise for you looking at. But brilliant point about as you're giving field lists and things like that to other people, they're aware. And we've had some instances where things that we thought were Z underscores, right? Somebody will call me and say, hey, my report, the field that I'm, always work on, or group on, whatever, is changed to Z underscore. Or, I'm looking at my page layout and what's this Z underscore? Why does this field say Z underscore? So, that also gave us an opportunity to a certain extent to find out if there was anything, that maybe shouldn't have been on that list after all, or should no longer be a report filter on a page layout, depending on which is true. So, cool.
The other thing I did, I was going to say to Katrina's point about documentation is on my list. I made documentation in one of the orgs I worked in more of a living document, and actually where there were gaps, I left gaps with a note that just said, this is owned by this team. We don't really know what it does. And we're kind of quite upfront about, and we did the bits we could do. So we almost said, like, if it's not documented in here, we've just not got there yet. So we did kind of the ones that we were getting the most questions on, or maybe if we were working on integration, but then just kind of left maybe some of the more obvious, like they're not necessarily needed. You can kind of figure out what the fields are, say on a task, but we just did kind of the really key ones that were maybe more bespoke or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And also my experience, Emma, has been there's some things that nobody knows what it does. Nobody knows why it's there, which ultimately help us figure out, like, this has been here for 8 years and nobody knows what it's doing or why. So now we're starting to figure out that maybe this belongs on the Z underscore list. So it is another benefit of trying to find kind of the who can help with the documentation, is you start finding over time that there's remnants of lots of people long gone, usually floating around an old org. So a few things that my teams have done, and we've done this in a couple different orgs that I've worked in, is we document in the platform itself, right? Because at the end of the day, we have this really flexible relational database where we can add fields and add different ways to track things and keep things in reports, and all the reasons we love Salesforce. That for us has been a very useful way to actually track what's going on in Salesforce. So I'm going to show you a couple things, and you can use little pieces of this or go kind of hog wild as we've done in some capacity. But the very first one that we started with is we actually have an object called Object Overview. And the reason for this is the description field. Well, I just said make sure you fill it out anywhere you can. On a custom object, it's very small. I don't know, off the top of my head, it's 250 words or 500 words or whatever. Certainly not enough to tell me or somebody new, what are we doing with this object? Who uses it? Why do we have it? How is it created? So the object overview is really used to kind of, again, give somebody who is inside my org, who's got some responsibility for something in there, a place to come in and see at the highest level, what is this thing? And again, I work in a lot of orgs that are very, very custom with lots of custom objects. If you work in an org that is, really kind of the standard out of the box, or they're kind of obvious what they are, maybe this is overkill. But encourage you to think about if there would be some utility. So a couple of things I also wanted to point out of why we like doing this, and we as my team, is we put accountability. So every object is owned by somebody. And own just means that, part of what they've got responsibility for is ensuring that the documentation is looked at least quarterly, right? We all kind of know it's not realistic that you're going to every single minute make sure that everything is exactly up to date, but somebody can come in here and kind of get a sense and know that at least once a quarter, we've kind of looked at a high level to see, is there anything really significant that's changed that we need to make sure that we note here. We also use Confluence today, and have lots of documents that, don't necessarily fit here. We've got, diagrams and things like that. So this is also a place where it can be kind of our table of contents, or my first place I go to go out and find various and assorted key documents that are related to any particular object. So in this case, this is my deal support request, and I can see exactly, how we use it, how it's created, if it's automated, if there's automation, what the logic is behind it, how ownership works, how sharing works, and then again, even if there's any initiatives or known issues related to it. So that's our starting place. I'm actually gonna jump ahead and go through this, and then I'll go back to that other page. And then just kind of what we have done inside our organization is we have then kind of taken that idea of the object overview and really built out a full change tracking system. So the object overview is where we kind of got our arms around like what's in here and how do we use it. And then to the point we're talking about, how do we make sure that we have documentation or details about changes we make? Why did we make them? When did we make them? Exactly what was involved in those changes. This is what we've come up with is a custom change control app inside our org. And, again, for, some people have other tools in place like Jira. This might be repetitive, but for us, this has been very useful inside multiple orgs. So the concept is we've got the concept of a story or a ticket, kind of depending on what you call it, which is really, zip over here real quick. So this is the what and the why. So whether, hopefully everybody has a process for intake. We don't make any changes on the fly. We've always got a place where we're documenting who asked. We're making sure it's a vetted request. And then, depending on if you're working kind of in agile and formal stories, you might have, that written out here. I've got it blocked here, but there's a description where generally you would see kind of the story behind this. But then what we do is we say, okay, as part of that story, in this particular instance, I need to create a new record type for my procurement support DSR, so deal support request, which is what we were just looking at on the object overview. And then we actually have a child object under that breaks down what are the actual items, the things that I need to do, the click streams, if you will, in order to create this record type. And in this case, I needed to modify a process builder. That's how we create our DSRs. So if I'm going to now support a different kind, a different type, I need to modify that. I need to add a page layout because procurement support is going to have their very own page layout. And I need to add the record type itself. And if we were to click into, this modification, I'd be able to see all the details in terms of, if it was a page, who needs access to it. So this is how we communicate as a team to exactly what those changes are. And it's how we communicate if we or somebody else are going to be putting together our change sets, or in our case, we use Capado, our Capado deployments. We know exactly what the components are that need to go in there. And if there was a manual step that needed to happen post-deploy, like a data load, for instance, you'd actually see that listed as a mod as well. So I'm going to pause there real quick and see questions. None? No questions on mods even?
This is so far beyond what I do because I'm a solo admin. And generally the best that I get to is for really complicated stuff. I'll build out in a sandbox and then get a little bit of feedback from people who look at it very briefly, go, yeah, that looks good. And then I'll put it live and then I'll start getting proper feedback. But
I would imagine even as a solo admin, you probably track all those requests somewhere, right?
Not really. I've come up with most of the improvements and requests myself. So documentation is a black hole for me. Yeah. I've got various different OneNote pages and notebooks of scribbles and saved emails and things that, I'll come into work one day and sit down and go, I don't know what I'm doing.
I will tell you then,
5 projects I'm supposed to be working on at the moment. So
yeah, having been a solo admin, I hung out my shingle as a freelancer for some number of years, so I totally get it. Highly would recommend. The most basic would be I would call it a story or a ticket. It used to be that I wouldn't work in any org without just this thing. And I've called it different things. I've called it story. When I worked in my last company, we called it SOS, Sales Ops Support Request. But a most basic thing that says, is there a submitter? You know, what kind? Is it a bug? Is it an enhancement? You might be the submitter for all of them, but for no other reason but keeping you organized and being able to show the value of how much work you're doing, what that work looked like. I guarantee it'll give you hours back in your days if something that basic.
And you've got Salesforce at your, you know, at your disposal. You know, there's no need. We're talking about a system here that manages it all, but a simple parent, you know, of the story or the ticket, and a child for the different changes, even if it's all just manual entry. At least you've got something then to say you did this because of this. Because if you ever implement something and suddenly it's not working, you can go back and search, well, okay, why did I change that field on the opportunity? What was that for? And I think one of the things that's important to track when you're making these changes is the why you're doing it. Because, you know, changing a record type might be, you know, makes sense to an admin judge, but when it comes back to something's not working, knowing why you did it is very important. To know you did it because there is a change to the sales process. There's a, you know, some new input from the marketing system, whatever it is. But I think you know, certainly when you get into bigger and bigger projects, tracking why these things occur and what they're related to, what different features of the system, it becomes invaluable.
Yeah,
worth its weight
I
in
would
gold.
agree in the piece. I think is that Phil that was talking? It looks like you're Yeah, no, thank you, Phil. I think that's so critical, the why. And there's two parts to the why, right? One is the business why, which I would expect to see in the story for sure. You know, so-and-so asked me this because we agreed because, you know, whatever that is. And then there's also the technical why. The reason that we decided to do this as a master detail instead of a lookup, or the reason that we decided we needed a junction object on this, or the reason we decided that this was going to, you know, be a flow instead of a this, whatever that is. And what I always say, again, having come back to an org I built 5 years ago, like that would have been golden. And I always say, I'm not perfect at this, so I don't proclaim to be, but you know, from one who needed to know or can't even remember maybe what we did last month, why, it's both of those whys, the business why and the technical why.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just completely blowing my mind and definitely something that I want to try and get in place. I think my last role was at a software company and we used Confluence and Jira and all those tools. My husband is a dev, so I hear him in his scrums every morning because we both work from home. And I just know, working for a company who's not a software company, I can't go and get that tool because my company's not going to pay for it. But it never occurred to me to build out in Salesforce. So
well, and especially now we've got Kanban list views. I mean, you can really kind of get that same concept, right, of how we're moving our work through, which is what we have done. I'm going to just put one other piece on here, not to go crazy. This is just my detailed mod, but I also wanted to say we had one additional related list, which is our rollout. So, you know, my rollout consists of multiple stories. My stories consist of multiple mods, which is what we just looked at. And I can see at a glance on any given day, you know, again, I'm using just Salesforce tools here. It also gives us as admins an opportunity to practice with different tools or features or functionality that maybe we don't have reason to use in the org, but we want to try out, right? So maybe you want to try dynamic custom forms. Maybe you want to try an approval process. Maybe you want to kind of figure out how to custom links work in Lightning, like whatever these things are, it's utility for us. But it's also a real live use case where we get to put on our Salesforce consultant hat and figure out how to use and sometimes learn different features and functionality on the platform itself.
So I will just shout out, Jodi, that we have some really great comments and questions in the chat. So a lot of people echoing that, you know, documentation, while difficult, is useful, and not just because, you know, it's useful for you to refer back to, but also for others, whether you're going on vacation or whether, you know, you inherit an org. Monique had a really great comment, so I'm going to see if I can pull that back up. She said, I document as I go. I use personal documentation and the standard one for work Confluence. If I go to another company, I can use the notes to help me if I run into a similar situation. She said she worked at an org that refused to document. She had to use personal documentation just for her own sanity. And then Doug asked if anyone had used a UPN or process map that Ian Gotts featured for the BA exam. Anyone using Ian Gotts's tool?
I'm not, but I did give it a shout out here for the record, which is Elements.
Okay.
So I skipped this, right? Because it was starting with object overview. It was like, you know, you can go as little or as big. And, you know, there are great tools out there. I've looked at it. I haven't used it. But if you've got budget, then, you know, absolutely. I think, you know, the more the better. And there's things like that fit right into the org. That one looks pretty slick.
Yeah, I have seen a little bit of Elements, and it does look, like you say, quite slick. It looks really cool, actually. And then I assume I know the answer to this, but Ruby was just asking if you're using Jira or another ticket tracking system, do you need to build this as a parallel system, or, you know, would that suffice?
So it's funny. It's a little bit controversial in my organization right now because we're moving all agile and they're trying to go all Jira. And we've now just built out this concept of the modifications inside Jira. So you can do it. I don't think Jira is as easy to use and report on. So, you know, we're also contemplating, are there ways that we can put some integrations where we're doing something in Jira and it's flipping back to Salesforce? Maybe these mods don't need to live in Jira. Maybe our tickets do and they're replicated. So I don't have a great answer for that yet, Ruby. It's still kind of a work in progress.
I think there is an integration tool that connects Jira to Salesforce, but yeah, Jira is not as easy to configure as Salesforce is. But you, like I say, start small.
Yeah.
Start, you know, you can grow it out as much as you want.
Yeah, and it, you know, for Katrina, a custom object with 3 fields, even, like, you don't need to go crazy right out of the gate, and it will give you so much time back and so much fodder as well later for being able to talk about all of the things you're doing. If you need to, at some point, make a case for additional resources, it's a lot easier to do it when you've got good reportable metrics around kind of what you've been doing and why and what was involved.
Yeah, good to report back to your boss and all the stuff you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And just
Good
one of
to-do
the things that I've always thought about was I'd love to have a data dictionary, just a list of all my fields and what they do. And then where would I save that? And what would I do with it? And I know there's certain tools in the App Exchange, but I spoke to our head of data about them and he was nervous about where the data was hosted and all the rest of it. But yeah, it would be really easy to just
So we
have
keep ours on the object overview, right? A link to it. There are really good tools to start with. Mine are a little bit old school because we've just had it in our org for so long that I just recently started looking to see if there's something better. Field Trips, the one that we've always used, but it doesn't give you some of the metadata around help and description, whereas it looks like Metazoa, and I think there's some other ones that do. They just pop it out. They pop it out in an Excel. So you're not keeping your data somewhere else. You're just, you know, kind of running the tool. It's running essentially a batch job and shooting out a report. At least Field Trip. I haven't seen how Metazoa works. There's also, I'm going to throw this out for the group because I have not spent enough time on this yet, but it's on my to-do list, is the new metadata fields. So the fields that are designed for tracking kind of the privacy and all that, where you can say specifically what a field is. There's probably a formal word for these that I don't know that I should be talking about. I call them the metadata about the metadata. But running reports on those, I've actually found that there's some really interesting things that come out that I couldn't get any other way, including like some, you know, being able to report on what formulas are and some of that. So that's next on my list. And we don't use those fields for their intended purpose, but we may start using those to indicate where fields are implicated in integrations, because we can see, of course, with the where is this used button, if something is implicated inside our system, but we don't know if that is being picked up somewhere else and we're going to break something. So we're contemplating starting to play around with those and see what that gets us. I don't know if anybody here can speak to leveraging those fields at all.
I haven't used them. Generally look at tools for impact analysis. There's, what was it called? Panaya. So again, it depends what you can use it for, what budgets you've got, because there's lots of tools out there, but they get more and more expensive. But the bigger projects get, maybe the more they need them.
Yeah, exactly. And then I don't remember who said it earlier, but in the spirit of like, let's not discount, like let's work with what we've got at a bare minimum, getting a subject matter expert to walk through the functionality and record it as it pertains to what users do. And then the same thing to get somebody who understands how it's built in Salesforce to walk through that and record those two things. Like, don't underestimate, that goes a long way. And if you've got, if you're taking a new role, I might encourage you to ask if the old person is leaving, and in the course of your interview process, if they're still there, that would be a great suggestion. Ask about the state of the documentation. And if the answer is like, not too much, ask about a bare minimum. That is something that they could facilitate, or even ask somebody to come back and spend a day with you after you get started.
So just really quick, Ashley just called out how cool it is that you use the path so that your stakeholders could also see where the status of projects was. Monique echoed that, yes, it was nice to have stakeholders not bothering you all the time if they can just see where they're at. Gurav has helpfully added an Elements Cloud free trial link, so feel free to use that. I think that also tracks metadata, so that could be a good solution if you're interested in that. And then Deepesh has asked some really great questions, but they're sort of tangential to the conversation. So in an effort to keep things moving, I'll table those and we can talk about them when we're wrapping up.
Cool. All right. The last thing I was going to give is just a couple tips and takeaways. So number one, use the platform. We just talked through that. You've got it at your fingertips, and it's a very great tool, so take advantage of it. Two, we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about description fields, but I think a lot of times we get intimidated because we think about what's the perfect documentation look like. And it's okay to start small, start with what you've got, but agree within your team, with your, whether it be your admin team, your management group, whatever, what's your bare minimum, and then build that into the standard operating procedure and try to hold each other accountable, including yourself. I'm bad at it, I admit. Account for it. So this is something else. I think part of the reason that a lot of times we don't get around to documenting is we give our estimates for how long something's going to take, and we don't take that into consideration, right? Whereas it is actually a part and parcel of the work we're doing. Consultants are really good at this, by the way, because they get paid for this. It's usually the in-house admins. We're really bad at this, right? We think about delivering the work, and then we want to deliver more work, and we don't get paid by time and materials. So, we tend to underestimate, I think, how long things take really to put a bow on it. So you've got to build in the time, you've got to budget for it. If you're in Agile, put in spikes in your sprints where you're actually acknowledging that that's work that needs to be done, or include it within the definition of done itself. Consider the alternative, right? So nobody wants to do it, but in lieu of having it, you're the one that knows it. You do not want to be the only person that knows how something in Salesforce works, right? You do not, because that means somebody is calling you during your time off. It means somebody's reluctant to give you a new job because they really know how valuable you are and they don't believe anybody else can do it. And it also means it's very difficult for you to leverage other resources, whether that be a new admin, be it outside consultants, because it's all in your head. It seems harder to help somebody help you than it would be otherwise. So people end up saying, I'll just do it myself. So consider the alternative. This one here, leverage resources. It doesn't work everywhere, but I like to remind everybody that as Salesforce professionals, particularly if you're an admin, particularly like if you're, Katrina, you're a solo admin, you have unique skills that and credentials literally in terms of sysadmin powers that nobody else can do, right? So your best and highest use of your time is that you are doing those Salesforce things, those solutions, whatever those things are, hands on keyboards and all the work that it takes to build that and deploy that. that other people can't do. There are other people in your organization who can document things, who can process map and do some of that. Now, easier said than done, I know, but it is at least worth always thinking about, is this the best and highest use of my time if you've got a small and mighty team or a solo team? And consider that as part of some of the asks that you can ask the help me help you. I would love to help you do this. In order to facilitate that change, I need to understand first the current state, and then we're going to need to document the new state. If I can at least get you to do the business piece, I can fill in some of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes from an automation standpoint. How does that sound? And again, that might not mean that we come up with the perfect, UPN model of documentation, but it might mean that you get something on paper, could be text, it could be a PowerPoint that you might not otherwise have. So I just always encourage everybody to say, leverage your resources, particularly for things that don't require Salesforce specific skills. And then lastly, start now, start new, right? So like we say, the best time to plan through is 20 years ago. The next best time is now. Stands true with documentation. Trust me, wish I would have started when I built this org. Next best time to start is today. And at a bare minimum, we can start with the next change we're making, the next thing we're building, and work our way back. We don't have to feel like it's all or nothing. Kind of like the reason my office is a mess is I just can't bring myself to like get to it. Whereas if somebody just said, Jodi, just clean your desk, just your desk, right? I got to take that same approach to my documentation. So start now, start with what's new. Don't get overwhelmed with where you are. So that's all I've got. So Kristen, I don't know if there's other things in the chat or if you want to open up the floor for discussion.
Yeah, so I will just comment that Ruby had a great comment that got some good further comments, sparked some further comments. She said that, and this is how you know she's worked at nonprofits as well. Actually, I've noticed some people do want to be the only ones who know how things work for job security. When taking on change management projects, that's the thorniest use case to tackle because these individuals are resistant to implementing new processes. She's wondering how you've handled resistors to change in those situations.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a different approach, right? Which is the person that believes that their process is the exact best way to do it. And I wish I had a perfect answer. I don't think there is one. I think in my experience, it's having that empathy and spending enough desk side time with them and folks around them to have identified places where you can point to measurable benefit, right? Where you've had enough conversations to talk about like, hey, walk me through how long it takes you to put together the donor mailing list every month, or whatever those things are, and to be able to find a way to make them think that they're coming along with you and that you've together have come up with this thing where you can say like, look, I sat with you last month. I know that was an all-day process to get this done. Let me show you some ways that I think would shave time off. How do you think this would work if we adjusted this piece of it? I mean, it's a little bit of that. It's, getting in their shoes with them and making them think it's their idea.
Yeah. So there's a comment, they might not think their process is best, but they feel vulnerable because they know that it's not. And Ruby agrees. And it is tricky, right? Because it's like you don't want to sort of do things to make them feel further vulnerability that they might feel would dislodge them. But equally, they're a roadblock to progress. So yeah, that's it.
And again, I think the best I can say is then you bring, to the extent you can, that you see if you can say, let's figure out how to do this together so you can present a new and improved process instead of we are coming in to change your process, right? That's the best piece that I can suggest.
Taking the small steps to build the trust and knowing that it's not going to happen overnight, I think often. All
What
right.
Jodi just said, like take the technical aspects out of it and make that person feel like they are going to shine because of it. Like, how can I make you look better? And people seem to be more receptive to that.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah,
I'm just here to facilitate making your life easier, right?
That's what we're all here for.
I have gone
So-
to the other extreme, and after trying all of that stuff, and yeah, there've been a few people I've worked with who are absolute gatekeepers of their knowledge. And I said, right, well, you're now a business risk. You're a single person dependency. You are a risk. We need to be able to operate if you leave the organization. So we're going to operate that way. Join us or don't. I don't care. It's, you know, it's extreme, and it can be a bit painful. There have been a couple of people who have worked like that, who have been managed out, that I've worked with. It is, you know, it is a risk to the organization that you have to take seriously. In some instances, sometimes, you know, you just need to have a gentle chat and show people, actually, if you're doing good work, even if you're doing average work, nobody wants to do your extra work. Nobody wants more. Never, ever, when I've explained the work that I do, has somebody said, oh, that's grand, I'll do that instead. You don't matter. And never, not once.
Absolutely. I think you raise a good point though, too. I call it, in my book, I call it throwing the flag, right? That whether you're, you know, in a house or a consultant, that at some point, if you do identify risks, and, you know, ideally in that instance, if you see that early on, let's just say you're a consultant, you can raise that as your sponsor and say, would you, you know, are you in agreement that one of the objectives here is to mitigate this risk, assuming you even know about it, in which case it gives you an opportunity to go back and check back in. And if it's not getting addressed, then you do have an obligation at some point as appropriate, because you want to try all your other things first. It sounds like, Susanna, that's what you've done. When
It's
all else fails, that we do want to make sure that we, you know, get help, which is what throw the flag means.
A much easier conversation in-house than as a consultant, for sure. As a consultant, you are expected to make it work. As an
It's
in-house.
interesting. I think that's an interesting take, because I always say it's interesting, or it's easier to deliver hard news as a consultant than in-house, in my experience. And you know, as a consultant, I feel like I can go to the CEO and say, like, look, you brought me in as an expert. Let me tell you what I'm seeing. Let me tell you some of the things I've observed. Let me tell you some risks.
It may be more
always
to do
feels
with,
a little bit more political.
yeah, maybe it's more to do with the roles that I've had as a consultant, which were developer and solution architect, rather than now where I'm an enterprise architect. And so, yeah, right. Well, here's our strategic direction, and in order to achieve that, this is what we need to do, and these are the blockers. And sometimes they help people.
Yeah.
All right, so I wish Deepesh would join the conversation, because he's asking some great questions. So he just mentioned that, sort of tangential to Ruby's point, you know, Jodi, you've been in the business a long time. What are your thoughts on the cliched phrase, learn, unlearn, and relearn? So again, kind of tangential to the question at hand in the instance of somebody who maybe is a little bit unwilling to be flexible or relearn or unlearn, as it were.
It's funny, I actually don't know that phrase. I was just sitting here thinking about, what is it? Tell me again what it is.
Learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Well, it's funny, because my gut reaction there wasn't necessarily as it pertains to clients. It was, that's how those of us who've been doing Salesforce for 20 years feel right now, right? All of the stuff that we're unlearning and relearning, be it how our user interface looks, or now how our declarative automation looks. So I'm going to have to adopt that phrase, although I don't know I can comment on it as it pertains to clients and stakeholders.
Yeah. Anyone else want to take that on or use it as a point for discussion?
Well, I was just going to say it depends on the context, but I don't know. Glass is half full, rather than unlearn, just treat it as experience, knowledge of what works, what doesn't.
And I would probably
Depends on the context. Relearn.
Yeah, and I would probably go on, Phil.
I was just going to say everything changes. Like you just mentioned in there. I mean, how Salesforce has changed from, you know, the original Sales Cloud on, you know, the look and feel. I think what we're on third, fourth version of the UI itself even as well. So it just, everything changes. So whether you're learning new things, whether you're needing to adapt to change because something that you previously did one way has changed, or whether it's something that just no longer, features no longer supported, that's just part of the ecosystem. That's the way it is.
Yeah, well, you definitely, I think, can't be an effective admin. You could probably still be an admin, but maybe not a great one if you're not constantly on the learning train. All right, so Deepesh had his original question was, again, Jodi, you've been here a long time. You've seen the evolution of the admin role. So, we'd love to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that evolution, and maybe some tips that you have on helping people kind of brace for change, or what you see as challenges ahead.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on the changing nature of the admin role. What I see is, I think we're kind of at an inflection point. And I think the change to flow really kind of puts the pin in it, if you will. And historically, admins really were the functional specialists. We did front of the house and back of the house, as I like to call it, right? We were the ones that were doing the process mapping and the identifying things, working with users, all the front end stuff. And then we went and did hands-on keyboards as well. And back in the day, we could do that because it wasn't so complex. And it was a simpler learning curve, I think, to sit and learn a workflow or learn how to process builder. The trend that I see, and I see just the jobs that we're seeing now in this space, I think are validating this, is as the tool, the app has become so much more complex, technically complex, just in terms of its breadth and its capabilities. And I think now with Flow, I see that it's not enough to just know point and click. You need to actually start understanding a lot more technical concepts that are more dev forward. I'll use that term. We're seeing our testing get more complex. This concept of DevOps, like these weren't things that existed in the Salesforce world, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, something along those lines. And so I think what we're seeing is the rise of the product role, we could call it the BA role, might fit into this product management concept that is starting to mirror more traditional software development, right? So the way that we manage our Salesforce teams is starting to look and feel very similar to the way custom dev, custom software has always looked, where you see a separation of the front of the house and the back of the house, where there's now many more orgs that have the concept of the product owner, the product manager that works with the business. I always use the term, they're the ones dreaming about the business problems that technology can solve. And Salesforce is, I think, increasingly more back of the house, where we're the ones dreaming of all the ways the platform can solve those problems that product's bringing to us. So I think depending on the size of the company, depending on where we are, some companies are going to hear that and go, of course, we've been doing that for years. I think other orgs are probably going, I have no idea what you're talking about, this product thing, but it's certainly a trend that I see. I think there's good and bad in it. I think the beauty of Salesforce has always been that business people could understand and then do to quickly solve the problems, be it salespeople, nonprofit experts, whatever it is. And I think there is always a little bit of separation, a little bit of loss that happens when we have different people doing the work versus identifying the problems and working with the business. But we also have a whole lot more we can do now. So I think that's probably a worthwhile trade-off. So be curious if that resonates with folks on this call, if you guys know this role of product, if anybody's in this role, if you're seeing this.
Lots of agreement in the comments.
There's definitely a widening of skills. You mentioned a few there. I think success in an admin role is because you can build features now that people with less technical skills can still actually manage. The understanding the business more is an extra level of skills I think that admins would benefit from and do benefit from. And that's how and you mentioned going more technical, but I think for me, I think there's more of a split there because the technical is getting much more technical. So there's almost multiple layers approaching where you've got your very techie building components that then admins can develop on top of and then hand over to the business, and business can change a few tweaks in in metadata or drag some components around and build new experiences. So it's
I think we're saying the exact same
applications
thing,
are
Phil.
put together is changing.
Yeah, no, I think I'm in complete agreement with you. I think we might see those roles change. So the Salesforce product person is the one making those small changes, maybe really thinking more about UI. And because of the nature of the technical stuff, the people doing that work are also probably not doing that as much as they used to or won't be. The one other piece I wanted to throw out to see if anybody else sees this is, back in the day, it was very rare that somebody was a good admin and a good developer, right? And I mean, if somebody told me they did both, I usually was like, really? You're probably not that self-actualized, right? You probably don't do one of those things as well as you think you do. And just, it used to be that the skills were really different, right? Admins were doing all this front of the house stuff. Everybody needed to know their way around the admin console, but different skills, and devs were doing code and, test classes and things that most admins didn't know about or have time to learn about or think about. The other thing I think that's really interesting right now is, flow is kind of the great equalizer to a certain extent, or at least where we're seeing, I call it like the Venn diagram, right? That there's, admins are having to learn these dev concepts to support these flows, but our devs are also having to get comfortable and learn these declarative tools, which now start making a lot more sense in some cases than the triggers they're used to writing. So there's this world where it's coming together. And my belief, if I had to put money on it, is we're going to start seeing that as an area of expertise, a Salesforce automation specialist that has a niche just in that just like we have data migration specialists or some other things where those people are going to get dropped in to go in and work on complex automation, whether it be Clicks or code or some combo thereof.
Mm. Yeah, that probably would be an interesting role to see coming out.
So
Automation specialists.
Lots of discussion around like the blend of admin dev and a little bit of comment regarding job descriptions. So Ashley says, so many job descriptions for new admins have developer skills listed as requirements. And Deepesh comments, actually in India, there's like basically no such thing as an admin job anymore. Anyone, who goes to apply for a job has to have developer and admin skills. So maybe some regional differences or just, but yeah, certainly I think from my perspective as a recruiter, I often come to the agreement with many employers that, look, HR teams that are putting together job descriptions, it's always a wish list, right? And they're always adapting it off of what they've seen before, or whatever the hiring manager just tells them, like, here, put some buzzwords onto something, or they've just pulled something down from a link from Salesforce Ben and like sent it off to the person in talent acquisition whose job it is to post. So it's a wish list, and also, in many cases, it's not a necessary skill. What's a lot more necessary, again, depending on the type of role, is your ability to communicate with the business, your ability to understand and work in the platform, but equally to translate those kinds of requirements to the business and to have the ability to get that information out of the business to do it successfully in the platform, among other things. But yeah, I'd say if you meet 60% of the job description, feel free to fling a resume in that direction if it's of interest to you.
And I think you bring up some other really good points there as well, Kristen, which is like, the admin job comes in a million different flavors. And there you could get 100 people whose title is Salesforce admin and talk to them about what they do every day. And it's vastly different depending on size of the org, how the team is created. You will have admins that really are also business analysts, right? That could easily step into a business analyst role. You will have admins who are easily solution architects, right? We could argue about all the different flavors of architect, but at a bare minimum are creating some fairly complex Salesforce platform, data relationships and data models and automating apps, whatever those things are. That's often an admin. You can also find admins in, large organizations who have, fairly rote jobs, meaning, they go every day and do user admin and answer some tickets. So, I think it's challenging as somebody who hires admins to be able to call that out. Like, what do you actually do, right? What have you done? And then what do you want to do? And right now, kind of the words are all getting mucked up. So you really, to your point, have to drill into, like, tell me about how you spend your time. When you say, we built this thing, we have this org, what was your role on that? And I have this dream at some point of there's some kind of spectrum that we could figure out that, build versus maintain on different things where you tag, where somebody has been and, maybe number of orgs, and you end up with some kind of a formula or something that makes it easy to understand the breadth of somebody's experience. But it is hard because that word means so much, just, so many different people, and it's so broad. It's one of the challenges I had writing a book for Salesforce admins. How do I write a book for Salesforce admins when, then you throw in on top of it all the different clouds they work on, right? That, what you do, what you talk about, your vernacular, how you spend your time is so broad. So, you just kind of have to agree that there's this set of stuff that we all kind of know and likely do. But now it's a plug. My book might be equally germane for people who are Salesforce analysts or support analysts or have other titles, because there might be some of the same concepts that would.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic we could probably have like a whole nother session about. But lots of comments in agreement, lots of comments saying everyone loves the book, lots of comments saying this was absolutely a fantastic use of time. Lots of people saying, I wish I could stay, but need to go. So yeah, this has been incredible. Thank you so much, Jodi.
Thank you so much for having me and for letting me go on about all sorts of different things. I did put my LinkedIn up here, and I did say, yes, my name is spelled right, Hrbek. It's not a typo. And that's the only social I participate on, but I'm fairly active on there. And if I'm not already connected, would love to see y'all there.
Fantastic. All right, we will try and get some links in the chat, including to the LinkedIn page that you provided.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Jodi. So we're going to try and wrap things up because we are ever so slightly over time, but because of the great discussion, I could stay here all night, but we don't want to prevent anybody from going for the meals or anything like that. So we are going to try and wrap things up in just a second. So what we're going to do, I'm going to very politely put Jodi on the spot one more time and see whether we've got, as I mentioned before, we've got 3 copies of Jodi's book to give away, and these are signed copies as well. Jodi very kindly sent some across, and I picked them up last week when I was in Dreamforce. So we're going to look to send these out. So and we hope, and in full transparency, because of the shipping costs, we're going to try and keep them to UK-based folks. Because it costs quite a lot, and I can't claim all of the costs back from shipping. Jodi, is there anybody who you thought kind of
I need to make sure Katrina has this book, which talks about the basics of a ticket system. I don't know if she's UK. If not, I will send her one. So that Katrina's got to get one for sure.
Great, okay. That is fantastic. Being Kristen's also had Katrina in mind as well. Katrina is based in Newcastle, so we can send Katrina one. And Kristen, who do you think for the second one?
Yeah, so I have to give some props to Susanna, who is generally in these meetings, loves to like be in the background. I think she would probably describe herself as an introvert, but the fact that she's up here like throwing out things like sometimes you just have to manage people out of the business. I'm like, whoa, Susanna, who are you? Like, oh, I love it. So I'm gonna nominate Susanna for our nomination, and then we'll give away the other one at random here momentarily.
Great. So I am going to trust that people will be hopefully honest, be able to tell me if they aren't in the UK when they win. So because I don't know where everybody's from necessarily from the chat, we are going to just run it at random, and we'll give it to somebody from the UK area, and we'll hopefully see if they win. So I'm going to share my. Actually, I'm going to reshare my screen, because what's the point in not having a duck race if you can't hear the ducks quacking? Oh, hang on. Just see if that will work. I might not be able to do audio. Give me 1 second.
Oh, if you can't do the audio, it's like, what's even the point?
I know. But Dharma, there we go. So that should be on now. Let me just see if I minimize that and hide it. So here's the moment of truth. If we've got the audio. So we're gonna go run, and here we go. And looks like we've got Lynn in the lead. It's pushing up.
This is so dramatic. This is the longest duck race.
It is.
I can't believe we're all transfixed by racing ducks.
Great. So that was Suraj. So Suraj, I'm going to ask, if Suraj is one, are you UK based? Have we not got Suraj? Yes.
Suraj is here.
Yes.
Suraj says apologies.
Okay. So in that case, I'm going to assume that's a no. So Phil, because you came in second, you can have that copy of the book, and I'm going to now stop sharing my duck race because as much as I love
still hear the ducks.
The quacks are still going. Great. So just to kind of wrap things up, I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm just going to go through some announcements, and we're going to share those links, and then we'll wrap that up. So let me just go back to my slides. And here we go. Okay, so just to wrap up the closing announcements that we have, we talked a little bit so slightly about Flow in this session about how much it's changed in the admin game. Ironically, I am actually running a 10-week series on Flow, which started on Tuesday this week. So we have 9 more sessions of that left to go, and it's going to be covering a bunch of topics, including things like UX design, using Flow. And next week's session, which is on Tuesday at 7 p.m, is going to be focusing on migrating workflow rules and process builder into Flow and the main approaches for that. And it's going to try to have it as a hands-on session, and we're going to see how that goes. But that is there if anybody is interested in coming to that, and we should be seeing the links for these coming into the chat fairly soon if they aren't already.
Yeah, Build It in Flow is there.
Cool, great. Next one is just a little side plug. I don't know if anybody saw on Twitter like the viral conversation about how hard Dreamforce was for some people in different ways. So I decided, as a few other people in the community have done, that I'm going to just hold an open forum. I'm doing this on Saturday because of my schedule. But if anybody who was at Dreamforce, or even if you watch Dreamforce and have some very, very poignant thoughts to share, it's no agenda. It's just going to be how did you find Dreamforce, and just conversation around that. So that's happening on Saturday this week. Next up, Automation Dreaming. As I've talked about a few times, this group, along with Vicky Morris Henry, I am co-launching Automation Dreaming. It is going to be 2 days. We have the dates sorted, and we are going to be releasing tickets hopefully next week. But that's going to be the 10th and 11th of November, and we've got a bunch of really great sessions coming from across the globe, including sessions around marketing automation for Pardot and Marketing Cloud, as well as sessions around Flow. Quite a lot of sessions around Flow, as you can imagine. So there's going to be quite a bit there, and we are still working on things like the keynote and a couple of other ideas for it. But we are going to be releasing tickets hopefully next week for that, and that's going to be the 10th and the 11th of November. We are going to be finalizing exact timings as well, because we want to try and make it as globally inclusive as possible. So we will be announcing everything like that hopefully next week. Next one up is Slack Frontiers. If anybody's massive in the Slack, Slack is having their edition of Frontiers in London, and they're also doing that online in the 11th of October. So that would be happening in October as well. Last one from us. French Touch Dream is happening on December 1st in Paris, and they are still looking for speakers as well. So if you are interested in going to that, that is happening on the 1st of December, and the course of speakers is open until this Sunday, the 2nd of October. So it'll be great to see a bunch of people there. I'm booked myself in, but I'm also waiting to hear back about whether or not I'm speaking, and I was submitted a bunch of sessions and have another one to draft up as well, because I had an idea for one to do as well. But yeah, it'd be great to see loads of people there from in and around the UK and Europe as well.
Yeah, Jodi, how do you feel about Paris? I feel like this would make a really good session, you know?
There's worse things I can think of than needing to go to Paris. That's for sure.
All of us over on this side of the pond excited about San Francisco. Everyone over there is like, just take me to Paris, please.
And with that, that brings us to, and also final announcement, sorry, I did miss one. Next month, we are doing a session, and we have provisionally booked it to be in person over at Tuss Park again, over in Newcastle City Centre. So if you're in the Newcastle area, we would love to see you there in person. We do have one session lined up, and we are finalising the agenda because Kristen's on holiday that week. So it'll be just me you have to deal with, and you have to put up with me. Don't have to put up with Kristen ever. Kristen's amazing, but you do have to put up with me. So
maybe Luke will put in an appearance at that one. Who knows?
Maybe. I do have something I need to give to Luke, so I never know. You never know.
Dangle some possibilities there.
Exactly. So that's going to be Thursday, the 27th of October, 6 p.m. over at Tuss Park, and it'll be similar to what we did last time, probably a bit looser in the agenda to what we normally have, and more time just to chat, and we'll have food and drink there as well. And with that is the final announcement. So I just want to say a big thank you again to Jodi, and thank you to everybody else for coming. I'm happy to stick around for a bit if anybody does want to stick around and chat. But at this point, I'm going to stop the recording and say thank you to everybody for coming. And
thank you for having me, and thank you for all the great conversation and questions. I couldn't be more appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us. This was outstanding. Yeah. Definitely one of our better attended events. And
coming for that Newcastle eventually.
That's it. You're invited. Here you go. Come on. October.
Nice, cool.
We're gonna do another in-person over the holidays, I think. So
great.
All that Newcastle brown that awaits.